Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Urban Farmer Podcast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Now let's jump right into it. It's a flashback, The Urban Farmer, as originally recorded 10 years ago with myself and farmer Curtis Stone. Welcome to The Urban Farmer, week 18, July 14th, 2015. For every business, there comes a point in time when that business grows to the size where it can't be managed anymore by a single person. For Curtis and his business, this was the year. At the beginning of the season, Curtis hired a full-time employee to come on the farm to help him manage his farm. The idea was that by bringing someone on to help on the farm, it would free up time for Curtis to grow his off-farm businesses. So far, that move has paid off both financially and logistically, as Curtis's farm is at one of its most productive levels that it's ever been at. But that move, hiring someone, could have easily gone the other way and been a disaster. Anytime you go down the road of hiring someone, you take on the role of the employee dice. Sometimes you win, and sometimes you lose. As a result, taking on an employee for a small business can be scary. As a business owner, you're trying to weigh between the decision to spend money hiring someone and the return that you'll get from hiring that person. On one hand, you might not have a lot of revenue to allocate to paying that employee, so the money that you do pay them comes out of your share of the profits. And in that situation, when revenues are low or on the lower side, that decision isn't always easy. But on the other hand, if you hire someone, then it can take a lot of stress and pressure off of you and actually allow you to step back from the day-to-day grind and focus on the business instead of always working inside the business. When you do this, then you have a chance to actually grow the business, making that expense of an employee more than worth it. Which way do you go? For a new business, the answer isn't clear-cut. It can be a huge leverage point or a huge failure when you roll those employee dice. So what can you do to shift the odds into your favor? Control your end of the system. While you can't control everything that your employee does on a day-to-day basis, you can control the system that they work within. Knowing that, set the system up to work in your favor and set up the system to allow your employee or employees to thrive. From a management standpoint, there are 3 things that have made Curtis successful when it comes to hiring an employee. Number 1, teaching them the fundamental principles of the business up front. 2, have clear, defined systems in place. And 3, have clear, defined objectives for the business every day. These may seem obvious, but many businesses, large and small, don't do these things well. Why? Probably because it takes a lot of time. When you educate somebody to these principles, you're losing production time now to prepare someone to produce later. It's easy in the heat of the production season to just tell someone, go do ABC, versus taking the time to explain to them how and why you do ABC. One fills an immediate need at the expense of a potential longer-term problem, while the other takes longer up front, but probably saves you a lot of problems down the line.
What I can do is take a person through the reason behind the thinking, and that's the thing that I really focus on now when I'm training people on the farm or people that I'm teaching or consulting for, is to understand the thought process. This is why I do this, opposed to just do it this way. I don't like that, because then they don't really understand why you do it that way, and then they might see the logic in a different way. If they don't fully understand why you do it that way, they might find a reason to do it another way.
While innovation is great at times, in general, you don't want everyone doing everything their own way. So as a business owner, it's your responsibility to communicate the reasons behind the thinking and turn those reasons into tangible, executable systems. That's what chains do. If we step back and look at the larger business picture, that's what chains do, franchises. There's a reason why McDonald's can produce a consistent product across its 14,000 restaurants in the U.S. They have a lot of systems in place. Everyone knows what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. It works. And that's something that's worked for Curtis.
You don't want to hire somebody unless you have systems. You don't want to be running a farm when you barely know what you're doing and then hire somebody. That's going to be you just dumping cash down the toilet. That is going to be a huge waste of resources. You need to have systems and know how to do everything on the farm, or at least have an operations manual or something that can be passed off.
When you have clear defined systems in place, it takes most of the guesswork out of the equation. This allows you to produce a consistent product quickly and efficiently. And it also allows you to troubleshoot problems when they come up. Because if everyone does things the same way and something goes wrong, then you can quickly tell whether it was operator error or system error and then fix the problem. When you have an employee that understands why you do what you do and how you do what you do, then it comes down to when do you do it. Time can be tight on a farm and things can get hectic, so it pays to take a little extra time each day to schedule out the upcoming day.
But having clear objectives every day really makes things run smoother, because then there's no scrambling. There's no, oh, what should we do next?
If you're figuring out what you need to do each day as you go through the day, then you are for sure wasting time. So hopefully, these 3 metrics will save you time and hopefully make your experience more successful if and when it comes time to hire an employee. And finally, when it comes to hiring an employee, it helps to hire a good employee. For Curtis, the roll of the dice has worked out in his favor, and his systems have helped a great employee thrive. Things have actually worked out so well for Curtis that he's taken on another employee. How did he approach that decision?
I try to just look at it through the lens of value. And this is where wages come into play and things like this, because people often ask me like, oh, how much do you pay? And I'm like, what are you worth? I don't know what I'm going to pay you because I don't know what you're worth. I don't know what kind of value you bring. The reason that I took on another one and that I would continue to take on more is that if there's enough tasks on the farm that are simple enough that can be easily delegated, and what's made it easier now is that my main guy, Mark, he's trained enough now that he pretty much knows. Actually, he does. He knows every operation on the farm, which is great. It's the first time I've ever actually trained anybody to do that. He can do stuff in the office. He can print invoices. I was in Montreal for a week. He managed the farm entirely on his own. Oh, less things like coordinating with chefs. That's the one thing that he's not doing yet. But he can pretty much do anything in the field. And so it was easy to take on somebody else because I don't have to train that person now. They can just work with him. And then that frees me up. And that's what I've been looking to do, is to just free myself up more so I can finish my book and get some of these other projects that I have going finished. So that's really what it's about, is like, how easy is it for me to do it? Because in the past, I've been very reluctant to take on other help because it meant that I had to spend a lot of time with them and get them going. And so that was what prevented me from doing it. But now, because I've invested a lot of time in one person, they can take the reins, then it makes it a lot easier to grow. And that's one thing. I heard there's this guy in LA named Ty Lopez that I really like. He's this investor guy, but Joel Salatin was his mentor when he was growing up. When he was like 17, he worked on Joel's farm. And he always talks about how the best way to expand what you do is replicate what you know and make that easy to replicate, to pass that information off. And so I heard him say that quote about 6 months ago, and then it really stuck with me. And I was like, that's the biggest challenge I've had on my farm for the last 6 years, is being able to hand off what I know, because it was so internalized. But writing this book and creating an online course and lecturing on it for a number of years now has allowed me to do that. So that's where it's at, really.
Is part of the theory that goes into that then of saying, if I can successfully pass on the knowledge that I have, then I can then get somebody to do the task that I don't excel at, meaning you're really good at the marketing part, looking at the spreadsheets, and also diversifying on the off-farm activities. So do you view it as, let me get somebody who can farm almost as good as me, or maybe even better than me, and I'll focus on the parts of the operation where I can really incrementally add value?
Well, that's part of it for sure. It's not entirely it, though, because I enjoy and am pretty good at all aspects of my farm. So it's not necessarily just about finding people to do things that I don't like doing or that I don't want to do. there might be a bit of that. Like, I don't like bagging stuff for the market. Like, I just did it so many hundreds of times that at this point, I'm over it. And I know what you just alluded to there. I know that my time is a lot more effective in other places. So yes, there's an element of that as well. The other thing is, this comes from my sort of ideological side, is that, like, I want my farm to have a lot of social impact. And I want to look back in 10 years and say, hey, look what this thing that I've created, and be able to step back from it and know that it's become far bigger than myself. And I have never really been in a position that I could do that, because I was too busy working inside of my business than working on my business. And so now that I've trained some people to help operate this business, that I can look at the bigger picture and grow it. That's more of a possibility now, where it wasn't really in the past.
So do you see taking on an employee as like a multiplier, where it's one of these situations, the labor of two people tends to seem like you're getting more than two people's labor out of it at the end of the day? If it's just you working, say, 80 hours a week, and then you bring on somebody else and you both work 40 hours, do you think stuff gets done better or more gets done once that person's fully up to speed?
Yes. Yeah, when you're organized, it definitely does. For example, one thing that's great about right now is that this has been the best year for me, is I've been really able to organize and plan better when I'm not in the field for 8 hours a day or more. I'm able to come inside, go on my computer, look at the spreadsheets, look what needs to be done, organize our tasks, really make methodical lists. That's one thing that I've done this year that I've never done in the past. I did to a certain degree. Like, I've always been relatively organized, especially, in the last 3 years, just because the farm got bigger and I had more people working with me, so I had to be organized. But this year, like, every single day is plotted out. I usually do it a little bit the night before, and then do it in the morning, and then I have to update things as things get done, because sometimes things get done faster than I thought, or things that don't get done as fast as I thought. But having clear objectives every day really makes things run smoother, because then there's no scrambling. There's no, oh, what should we do next? And I actually did that a lot in the past. I remember in my second year of farming, I had a full-time employee, and there was often times when I stepped back from the farm, I knew there was so many things to do, but sometimes when you're just engrossed in, like, everything happening, you just can't see the forest for the trees. You're just like, you're engaged in what's immediately in front of you, that you don't see the bigger picture. And so I find being able to step back and look at my spreadsheets, look at my maps, look at pictures, and just take mental notes, and going over those mental notes really allows me to be so much more organized. And that means that I can be more effective with the people that work with me. And so in that case, yes, to what you said about 80 hours one person or 80 hours with two people, do you get more done with two people in those 80 hours than you do with one? The answer is yes, because I can step back and organize and delegate better, and then that makes things flow smoother and are more efficient. So for sure in that case, and this is probably the year that's been the best example for me.
I'm curious about that, because this is something I've always heard people say. If you could hire somebody, it can just take some of that pressure off and free you up to do just what you said. Focus on the big picture, organize things, and that allows you to be more effective. Work on things that matter instead of maybe just getting caught up in the whole hurricane of it all and scrambling all the time. But I get, for a lot of people just starting out, that if you're a single farmer or a couple who's farming, that there's a tightness of money. And at some point, you get to the fringe where we could afford to hire somebody, but do we really want to spend that money? And if we spend that money, are we going to get a bump?
My advice in that situation is, you don't want to hire somebody unless you have systems. Like, you don't want to be running a farm when you barely know what you're doing and then hire somebody. That's going to be you just dumping cash down the toilet. That is going to be a huge waste of resources. You need to have systems and know how to do everything on the farm, or at least have an operations manual or something that can be passed off. This is why the franchise system works so well, right? Like they take a franchise like Starbucks or McDonald's, for example, is they have everything is done the same cookie cutter way. And I'm not suggesting that's how we apply that to farming, because I'm sure some permaculturalists will gasp if they heard me say that. But I just mean you got to have some systems so that things can be replicated, because if you can't articulate to somebody clearly on what needs to be done and the best way to do it, then they're going to be going through a discovery phase to figure out what the best way is of doing it. And if you're paying for somebody else's trial and error, you're wasting money, because you're all of a sudden giving more value to them than they might be giving to you. And in my opinion, in order to have an employee, it's got to be value on both sides, right? But there's no point of hiring somebody if you're not going to get value out of it. Like I have one friend who's has really strong ideals and is very opinionated, just like I am. But him and I share a different opinion on work. He's has this opinion that nobody should ever profit off anybody's work. Like his idea is, I'm only going to hire somebody if I'm not profiting off the work. So it's crazy to me, but it's basically like he'll hire somebody and their work will just pay for itself. And then that's good enough for him, because he feels guilty of making money off somebody's work. But then my whole thing is that, well, then what's the point? If you're just going to hire somebody just to create a job, that's fine, whatever blows your hair back. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not running a charity here. I'm running a farm. I need to feed people, and I need to make a living doing it. And so if I'm just hiring somebody to just create a job, that's not very sustainable, because that doesn't take anything off me. If I'm going to hire somebody, I want to make sure that their value, if I'm paying them $10, $12 an hour, say, if they're not at least creating $30 of value, I have very little incentive to hire them. And realistically, I'm hoping that if I hire somebody, they're going to create at least $50 to $100 of value, especially when they start to get into harvesting and things like this. Otherwise, what's the point? I might as well just run the show myself.
That's an interesting topic, and it ties into more common causes of farm failure. And like you said, you're running a business here. You're not just going to hire people to hire them, because at the end of the day, you need to make a living. Your farm needs to keep going. You need to feed people in the process. And I think a couple of the points that you've touched on already are some things that I think really tie into some of these causes of farm failure. And I think one that you just hit on was this whole idea of having systems in place. In other words, is everything documented so well, maybe even mentally, so you could recite it, that you could bring somebody into your farm tomorrow and they could run it? I know in a lot of other fields, there's manuals and procedure things, like you said about the franchise model, and that's what helps enable the people to become successful. So my guess is most people out there who go into farming do a lot of winging it, and they don't have systems in place. And I don't mean you have to have them in right away, but where do you think in your farming career you need to really get into, here's my system, here's how it works, and know it clear enough so you can go back at the end of each day, each week, each month, each season, and then reflect back on it and critically think about that system, what worked and what didn't? How much room and runway do you give yourself at the beginning to say, okay, I'm new on figuring things out, but when the end of the runway comes, I need some systems in place that I can at least go off of?
I think it mainly just comes to the data points. Like, farming always has to have some kind of level of intuition involved with it. And that's the idea. Like, you and I were in a previous conversation, we're talking about everybody wants an app for everything. Like, you were mentioning an app that tells you when to plant certain tree species and when to harvest them and all that stuff, so that you don't even need to look outside of the app will tell you. For one, I don't think that's how farmers should be. And I think what makes farming appealing to people who really subscribe to buying like vegetables from a farmer's market or going to restaurants that serve local or buying to a CSA or something like that, is that there's a level of artisanship to the craft. And that's what makes it a craft that I think is just as on the same level as a skilled woodworker or a skilled tradesman, is that there's a level of artisanship that you have to it. So you need to have these methods as far as how many rows do I plant in an arugula bed, or how many what spacing is kale transplanted at, things like that. But it's hard to just pass off a manual. Like in a McDonald's, for example, there's all that infrastructure is cookie cutter and it's all there. Farms don't work like that entirely, especially in my situation because there's so many variables as an urban farm with multiple locations. So I can't really pass it off, but what I can do is take a person through the reason behind the thinking, and that's the thing that I really focus on now when I'm training people on the farm or people that I'm teaching or consulting for, is to understand the thought process. This is why I do this, opposed to just do it this way. I don't like that because then they don't really understand why you do it that way. And then they might see the logic in a different way. If they don't fully understand why you do it that way, they might find a reason to do it another way. And I find what's really important if you want to have train people on your farm is, or just in a business in general, is you got to have everybody doing the same thing, the same way. Because if you have one person doing something one way, and then you have another person doing the same thing another way, then if something goes wrong, you can't really backtrack and say, hey, why did this happen? Because if everybody's doing a particular thing the same way and we discover a problem, we know that problem isn't between the people that have been doing it. We know that it's something external. So that's really important, is having standards in the way things are done and then communicating the data on the details of it. So for example, I have a little tote. It has all the parts for my Jang and Earthway seeders in it. So it's got all the rollers and it's got the plates for the Earthway. It's just a little clear plastic tote. And when you lift the lid up on it, it has a laminated sheet in there that has the spacing and density and prospective yields of all the crops that we grow. So that when I say to somebody, go and do this planting, and I'll shoot, that's a task that was the last thing that I wanted to pass off, but I've actually passed that off now, which has been really great, is I can say, okay, Mark, go and plant these crops here and so on and so forth. He has in there all the densities, all the rollers and seeder and the plates that he's supposed to use for that. So there's no mix-ups, right? It's all there. But he understands the thinking on why it's done a certain way, but then you can just reference as to exactly how it's done that way.
I think that's brilliant. I want to reemphasize that point because I think this is where a lot of the problems, not just in farming, come about, but in a lot of society and entrepreneurship in general come into play. And we were talking about this before we started recording, is this whole idea that people they don't really know how to think in situations. They want you to tell them, give them a recipe, tell them how to do it, and then if environment happens and something deviates, they're stuck at step 5 and they don't know how to get to step 6 because the conditions have totally changed. So I love what you said there about this whole idea of you have to understand how the farm works and everybody has to be on the same page. And then people have to have the ability to say, here's the box, how our farm works. Situations are going to happen within that box that are going to have to force us to adapt with how we do things. But in general, we have some kind of macro principles that we always observe. And this is, I think, ties into the whole idea of crop planting. We could do 1,000 shows on that and we'll never cover every scenario that comes out there. But if you just understand the basics of here's the bed system, look at what you sold, estimate your sales, that gives you your base. You just then have to react how you think to where the market's going to be. And you can't be afraid to screw it up and make mistakes because that's all part of the learning process. But it all starts with the key of this is how it all works. These are the basic fundamentals. And after that, you just learn how to interpret within that framework.
Yeah, exactly. Because there is no, like everybody today, it seems, not everybody, but it seems like a lot of people today just want the easy answers. They want the easy route. It's to me like welfare state kind of stuff. Just give me the free stuff and that'll be fine. It's like everybody wants the handout. Everybody wants the easy stuff. I think all of those things lead to making our society incredibly fragile and soft. And it's the state of farmers today that really gets me bummed out on where people are at, because it's been easy. There's this whole, you wrote the foreword for my book and you have this great reference in there where you're talking about how the average income of a farmer in America today is negative $1,500. And how did it get that way? There's so many subsidies in agriculture that you put these things together and you start to see the easy way isn't necessarily the best way. And this is one thing that drives me crazy in agriculture, because it seems like there's always this pull for everybody just to want the free stuff. And I get it, because who wouldn't want free stuff? Who wouldn't want a handout? But I think it's this whole mentality of stoicism versus Epicureanism, like saving, like the struggle for today for a better tomorrow, opposed to the whole like you only live once, the YOLO thing, live for the now. And that's how society has become, is like this country was, Canada and the United States, both built on the hardworking values of farmers that came, especially us in the West, like people that came, the farmers that came out West were hardcore. They were hardcore farmers. They were tough. And now today it's like farmers are the biggest welfare collectors in North America. And it's like that, the easy road has not helped farmers. So I think that even that philosophical thinking for me is important for farmers to understand and applying that to the specific methodology of things is you got to understand the process to really get it, because there is no easy answer. And I don't have all the answers, but I have an approach that works.
You're dead on there. And I think one area where people look for a handout too is not necessarily in physical, tangible stuff, but in terms of free, easily accessible knowledge. Like, I think a lot of people focus on things when it comes to farming that don't matter. What model of tiller should I have? Where should I buy my seeds? What brand of seeds should I buy? What varieties of carrot should I grow? What varieties of lettuce should I grow? And I saw the same thing when I got into trading. People would obsess about their monitor setup. And at the end of the day, you're not going to live or die by having a BCS or having a Troy-built tiller. You'll make either one of them work if that's what you have. But if that is stuff people gravitate towards right away because that's fun to talk about, that's easy to talk about, those are fun things to do. Oftentimes they involve spending money, and people like the instant gratification of spending money, but they don't like to go canvass the neighborhood to find plots. They don't like to go work in the sun. They don't like to go turn over plots or grind it out in the market. And like you said, go to farmers markets and sell $200 worth of product their first week after working 80 hours. That's the stuff that sucks, and that's the stuff that people have to be prepared for and approach farming with the mindset of the hardship is not going to come from the questions that there's easy answers to. It's going to come from the questions that don't really have answers, but like you said, there's approaches to tackling those answers. It's then up to you and how you react when those situations come up.
That's not only a big character builder in your own personal life, but it's ultimately in the end what makes you a really good farmer is your ability to react to when the dice don't roll in your favor. What do you do? How do you handle this? If you have an approach to things, then you can apply that approach to all kinds of things. And for example, I have a systematic way of dealing with pests. It's not, because people always ask me in my workshops, they're like, how do you deal with this pest? How do you get rid of that pest? It's, I don't know. But I can tell you what I do when I start to see a pest problem. First, I figure out what the pest is. Then I try to figure out where it's coming from. Then I try to figure out what it likes. Then I work with that. Okay, can I put that crop somewhere else? Or is there a season that I shouldn't plant that crop in? What can I do that's passive opposed to trying to fight the pest? And people traditionally, not necessarily traditionally, but a lot of people in agriculture, they want to fight the pests. Like it's funny too, because especially in the permaculture crowd, I get this like every single workshop, every single lecture I've taught, hundreds of lectures over the last 4 or 5 years. I get this one every single time is, have you ever thought about planting some kind of special flower that repels certain pests or whatever? Because I don't know where it came, I don't know where that whole thing came from. There's something in permaculture where there's this idea that we can just create these perfect polycultures that have no pests. And that just doesn't exist. I'm sorry. It doesn't exist. It might if you have a Jeff Lawton kind of kitchen garden where like it looks like just completely natural. That might exist in that case. But if you're doing agriculture, there's pests. There's always pests. And that's just because agriculture doesn't exist in the natural world. It is entirely a man-made creation that is the birthplace of civilization. So pests exist in agriculture. There's nothing you can do about it. So you can either say, I'm going to fight that pest and have this really disappointing uphill battle, or you can say, what can I do to avoid this and go the path of least resistance and be more like water? How do I flow around this thing? How do I do the Tai Chi type move to avoid it? And so that might be not planting this crop at a particular time of the year, not planting this crop next to another crop that might be more prone to that pest. It's not necessarily, I'm just going to plant flowers everywhere and then that's going to bring in all these magical ladybugs and bees that are going to solve all my pest problems. I don't know. I've never really seen that happen. But it's the thinking to be like, okay, what can I do to avoid these things?
I think you're right on the approach, and let me know what you think about this. I think there's definitely some artisanship to being a farmer and growing. In other words, it takes a long time, multiple seasons of farming, many years of farming, to become an excellent grower of a wide variety of crops, to know the intricacies of the shoulder season and the light conditions for your area and the temperature fluctuations, all that type of stuff. But I think you can become, with all the resources out there now, including your course and book and everything out there, you can go from not knowing how to grow anything to become a pretty darn good grower pretty fast. And so a steep curve up and then a slow ascending curve as you achieve quote unquote mastery over time. And I think a lot of people approach wanting to grow things in farming from, I just want to know how to grow the crops. Circling back to your systems talk is I think this is, again, where people fall apart. And I think you could have somebody who comes in with a gardening background to try and farm who doesn't have kind of systems thinking in their head, business thinking in their head, and they'll have a much harder time of going into a farming lifestyle than if I pull a programmer out of Google or somebody starting up a venture capital for, or a startup company, and I put them into farming and say, okay, you have to farm, because they can quickly figure out this is how I grow stuff and become okay at growing stuff, okay enough to get by. But they can then think about the marketing side, the sales side, how they're operating, dealing with all that. And that person, I think, would ultimately be successful, more successful at the end of the day than the person that comes from the growing side. But that's not how farming's taught.
Totally. I think definitely in my last few years traveling around the States teaching people, the most successful people I see in farming have a really good understanding of economics or business, because they get that there's no such thing as a free lunch. They get that. I find people that have this thinking that there's something for free everywhere, whether the government gives you a welfare check or you're gonna apply for some grant or you're gonna do all this. Those types of approaches to farming aren't like the wins. They're not. The people that I see really crushing it in farming are just like, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to make it. I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to leverage the high quality information and I'm going to build off the experiences of other farmers I know, mentors, whatever it is, and just go for it. I just find this mentality of, oh, there's free stuff to be had doesn't really work in agriculture, because there is no free in agriculture. Like I don't think there's free anywhere in life. Even if the government gives you what's considered free money, it's either stolen from taxpayers or it's stolen from your children's future through inflation. So there's no free. I think the faster farmers can understand that, the better that they'll understand nature, because there is no free in nature. Agriculture, even Bill Mollison, this whole idea, we talked a little bit about this before in the past, like this whole lazy gardener thing. Oh yeah, you can just throw down some potatoes on a lawn, cover them with newspaper and sawdust, and you'll have this bountiful harvest, and I'm the lazy gardener because I don't have to do anything. That's BS. That just does not happen in farming. The more you work on your farm, the better it is. And I'll give you one example right now. that I'm experiencing this year that's a first in our farm is our tomato production. Our tomato production this year is unbelievably, it's insane. Like we've definitely had a hot summer, but Roger, my neighbor, my tomato guy, who's just a master tomato grower and has definitely gotten better over the years, and we've learned together on how this is done. His wizardry with tomatoes and his hard pruning techniques have dramatically increased our production. Like, I'm talking dramatically, because it's been hot here, and I've got other farmer friends not even half a mile from me who are growing tomatoes in greenhouses, even doing to some extent similar hard pruning techniques as us. And we're 2 weeks ahead of everybody. We're producing now 300 pounds of tomatoes a week. To be 200 and 300 pounds of tomatoes a week. That's insane. I've never had that kind of production this time of the year. And especially when I compare it to other growers. So that just goes to show you that the more you're directly involved in the systems and the more work you put into them, the more you get out. It's really that simple.
Here's a thought on that. I don't want to put you on the spot, but looking at your farm now, is there anything that is working, but you're noticing we could really be doing that better, and you can't really address it now, but it's something that you'll come back to in the off season and maybe start it over again differently next year or approach it differently next year? And how do you look at that process and say, if something's not working how I want it to, what are my options of changing it? How do you dissect it?
That's a tough one, but I like that question. I think I have an answer. The cool thing about that is that for the first time, like, I'm not working full time on the farm right now. I'm working about 15 to 20 hours a week on the farm just because I'm doing my book and stuff. But it also means that I have more time in my office. So I end up looking at my farm spreadsheets and all this kind of stuff. I have more time to observe and look at the data. And so one example, I thought about this on the fly a couple days ago. So I told you in a couple shows ago about kale, how we're not selling very much kale. Aphid pressure came on 3 weeks early this season. And what normally I do, and what I started to do there, but I didn't finish it because I tried another technique, and I wouldn't have been able to do this unless I thought about it and had the time to actually analyze and look back and say, okay, what's a better way to do this? So normally what I do is normally it's 3 weeks ahead of now. So normally by, say, the first week of August or the end of July, I pull out all my kale, and then around mid-July, I get the fall crop ready, and then that gets transplanted in the first week of August. And so I have a period where I don't really have much kale production, and it's a little slow to start even in the fall because those plants are just getting established. I don't really start to have good amounts of kale until late September kind of thing, and then I have a good crop into the winter. And so I tried a different strategy this time, and so what I did was I went and we had 5 beds of kale, 5 30-foot beds of kale. We pulled out 3 of them, stale seed bedded them, getting them ready to plant another crop. What I did with the other 2 beds, I tried this experiment, and I had done this in the past in a small scale, and it works to some degree. Is you get the aphids are coming on the kale, and they're just caked, like it's disgusting. Like every single leaf is just caked in aphids. But there's a trick you can do, and this is something I've told people who have home gardens for years, because it does work. As you go into your kale plants, you strip every single leaf off, and you get those off site. Like they go into your green bin. You don't put them in your compost. You get them off site. Then you take a high pressure water, like you take your water nozzle, and you spray the plants up and down, and especially the middle, like in the top of it where the new leaves are spreading, you spray that out, and so any aphids that are on the plant get knocked off, and aphids are soft body insects, and so they often don't have enough energy to climb back on. So if I didn't have the time to analyze and think about a new strategy, I wouldn't have done it. I would have just done what I normally do, is just pull it all out and then accept the fact that I don't really have kale until the fall. But so this way I'm going to try it where I left 2 beds. So in 2 weeks, it'll even possibly less. Those plants will grow some new stuff, and we'll see what there is for aphids on it. It probably won't be nearly as bad as it was, but it means that I'll have stronger kale production going into the fall that will tie over into my new crop. And so I would have never been able to do that if I didn't have time to sit back and analyze.
Conversely to that, when something's working well on the farm, how do you know that it's working well? So you could be producing 300 pounds of tomatoes a week now, but somebody could show up and say, dude, you should be producing 400 pounds. How do you weigh yourself against a metric that might not be there to know, God, are we even doing this right?
That's a good one. It's like what you just said, really. And that's why I'm constantly talking to other farmers. Even though I haven't been at the last week was the first week I'd been at the farmer's market in 6 weeks. And I miss being at the farmer's market because one of the biggest things I love doing at the farmer's market is doing my lap around the market and talking to all my farmer friends and just shooting the breeze and talking about production and what works and what doesn't. And that's often where it comes from. Especially my friend John, who's an old partner of mine. He's just the production master. Like, he's just an incredible farmer. Him and I we talked on the phone for an hour and a half on Sunday, and I loved it because it's just, him and I just, there's just no BS. It's just production talk, like the most hardcore. Most people would fall asleep or just lose interest because it's just so detailed what we're talking about, specifics about seed density or whatever it is, setting up irrigation and stuff. And that's for the most part what it is. The other, I guess, would be just looking at the value. The longer you do this, the more you start to just see averages and you start to go, okay, I've never really seen a standard bed unit, like a 25 foot by 30 inch bed. I've never really seen one bed produce more than, say, $1,500 in a season. So I have benchmarks. And so if I'm meeting those benchmarks consistently, I guess it seems like, yes, this is pretty maxed out. There's not really much else that could be done. It always seems like things could be better, but I think there's definitely some thresholds because at the end of the day, we are talking about natural systems. Like, I'm not a certified organic farmer, but for all intents and purposes, I am an organic farmer. I'm relying on biological interfaces to grow my crops. I'm not using petrochemicals or anything to fertilize. All of my nutrients or all the stuff that feeds my crops comes from biological processes. So at the end of the day, those things can only do so much. Once you get into like chemical farming and GMOs and stuff like that, sure, you can just turn up the dial and just pump it out, spray Roundup all over your Roundup Ready corn or whatever it is. And and that's where that type of thinking really comes from. And so I think you just find the benchmarks and go with that. But it is an interesting question that you bring up, though, because I thought for years that I was maxed out on my lettuce production. I thought I was maxed out. And then I got into this stuff, the Salanova stuff, and I'm like, holy crap, this is at least 40% more productive than anything else I've done in the past. As new technology comes in, new innovations come in, then those possibilities always change. And I guess it's just a matter of keeping your eyes and ears open and not thinking that you know it all, and always be ready to listen and check out new stuff.
So when you look ahead to next year, being about halfway through this season, is there anything that you really want to change knowing where you are now? Like seeing the market, seeing how everything's growing, are you going to try and shift crops in one direction? Is there any new techniques you really want to try? I know in the past you said you're sold on no-till, you're going to go that route. I ask because I know you have been spending time off the farm, you're in the office, you're thinking, you're looking at all this data, so I'm just wondering, is there anything really standing out of, next year I really want to try this, or I'm thinking we might want to do this. It might not work, but I think I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, I definitely want to get rid of a couple crops for sure. It's just looking at the numbers, like, why do I grow this? Like, we sell $1,000 of it a year. What's the point? Like, it's not even, it never gets ordered, or it's just definitely reducing the crops, increasing other things for sure, going to a little bit more land. Yeah, there definitely is. It's hard to think about that too much at this time of the year because the season is still, I don't know, maybe, what are we in week?
This is 18.
Yeah, so we're past the halfway point now. So we're getting there, but I find it's hard to keep it in perspective until nearing the end. Like, I find when the temperature starts to cool down, I think I can think better. When it's just so hot like this, I have a hard time thinking. And especially when we're in peak season right now and everything is producing. So we're just keeping up with that. Fortunately, we don't have weeding work to do. Like that's a big thing because a lot of farmers in the summer are just weeding and harvesting. So we're good there, but we just have so many sales that we're just keeping up with that. And then I'm trying to stay on top of the weekly planting and then make sure we're going strong into the fall, because in the next couple weeks, we start to hit the last planting dates of certain crops. And so when you get into those, you really got to make sure you're planting out enough to keep you going for a period. Because now we're past the summer solstice, the days are getting exponentially shorter. So now it's the opposite of what we've talked about in the past with crop planting, is the days get exponentially longer, now the days get exponentially shorter. That's a whole new arena of planting and getting ready for the winter. Yeah, it's kind of stuff that I try to think about a little bit later, but I know right now for sure I'm going to be cutting certain crops out. Something that's worked for me really well over the years is instead of eliminating some crops, I just grow a lot less of them. Like, for example, what I've done this year, which has been pretty cool, is my front yard at my house, which is only 1,100 square feet. So it's a relatively small plot compared to others. And it's also on the north side of my house. So on the shoulder season, only half of it gets light because the shade from my house goes over it. But what I've done at this plot this year is it's in high rotation. So in my book and my lectures and courses, I talk about how I have high rotation and bi-rotation plots. And so it's high rotation, so meaning that each bed will get rotated at least 4 times in a season. That what I've done is I do these little small segments of beds. So crops that I don't want to grow a lot of, but I want to grow some of just to have as a variety to offer. Things like herbs, say cut cilantro, cut parsley, spring onions, auxiliary greens. I call auxiliary greens anything that's like a green that goes in my salad mix that's not the base of a mix, but it's part of it. So like baby beet greens or mizuna or things like this. I do these really small beds. Like I'll do 6-foot beds to 12-foot beds, just little chunks. And so my front yard looks like a little bit of a checkerboard in a way. And so that's how I've been able to do that. And so I like to, I'll probably continue doing that. I might not eliminate a bunch of crops, but just really reduce them even further down the line.
There's a lot of good things we can talk about in future episodes. Things like approaching the end of season, how you deal with planning, of those types of things. For as busy as you are this time of year, how is farm life? I know you have 2 employees now, so you're working less, but given all the preventative measures on the farm, like weed control measures, you're not doing all the weeding, like you said. So you're busy and you're harvesting, but do you feel pretty relaxed?
Yeah, I do. I really do, actually. It's great. It's great. It's cool because if I wasn't such an entrepreneur, I'd be having the ultimate summer right now. Because if all I had to do was work on my farm right now, we could easily do it with just 2 people, myself and one other person. And we could probably do it at 30 hours a week each. Because the thing is for me is if I'm working on the farm 30 hours, that's going to greatly reduce the employees' hours. Because I work like nobody else because it's my business. I have that incentive. Having said that, I've really trained the guy who's working for me now is really hustles. So that's amazing. It's the first time I've actually had somebody who really goes for it. That's inspiring actually to see that kind of a drive. But if I were to be fully committed to the farm right now, oh man, we'd be working probably 30 hours a week, the 2 of us. I'm pretty sure my farm could operate on 60, maybe 70 hours a week total just for a period. But yeah, it's great. It's great. I've got so much time off the farm in the summer. It's weird actually.
And it's one of those things, I think a lot of people listening to this, if they're doing farming, they're probably like, what the hell? I'm dying right now.
Yeah, I know.
So it's nice to show that this is possible, it's achievable, and it takes some experience. You get your systems down, but you don't have to work 80 hours a week forever to take on this lifestyle. And I guess if you are, you're maybe doing something wrong.
You're absolutely doing something wrong. And most farmers are doing a lot of things wrong. Like, they don't pay attention to systems. They don't really crunch the numbers. They just think, oh, I'm just going to plant a bunch of stuff and hope it sells. And we've talked about that before too. That's just a recipe for self-destruction. I think one of the biggest things is got to be crop selection. People don't really, I see a lot of farmers, they don't really scrutinize their crop selection very well. It's just too many crops. Like, why are you growing 3 varieties of a turnip? Why are you growing 6 different types of head lettuce? Look at your customer data. One thing we did one year in our CSA that was really great is we surveyed so I ran a CSA for 3 years, and at the end of each year we surveyed all of our members, and the data was incredibly valuable. The first year didn't do the survey very well, so the data wasn't that great. You got to make the surveys anonymous, then people are way more willing to be honest, and so that's what we did the second and third year. Asking really specific questions and making it easy, like you can use like Google Forms and things like that. That's what we do, so they can just click like answers between 1 and 5 or yes and no, and then maybe at the end you can have a comment or something. But you wanted to make it really simple. It really helped us pick crop selection, because it was like we would discover that most people, like for head lettuce, most people just wanted romaine. They wanted romaine heads, and they're like, okay, that's easy. Why are we growing all these other head lettuces? They wanted 1 or 2 types of carrots. They wanted a couple different types of herbs. Like it really boiled down things. And that makes it so much easier in the production sense too, because we had one year around 90 crops. And it's a lot to manage, especially when you're looking at planting dates and you're planning your farm, and it makes things unnecessarily complicated.
What are your thoughts on this? Just the idea of people will want what you give them, meaning if you offer them 3 varieties of carrots, they'll say they want 3 varieties of carrots. But if they only get 1 type of carrot and 1 type of lettuce in a box, they don't know any better, so they're not asking for different types or more. Do you think farmers bring on some of these problems themselves by just trying to put too many varieties into a CSA box when they should just simplify it down and versus trying to do every type of every variety?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key with that is it's good to try new crops, like absolutely. And it's good to try new techniques and new things in general. But you want to do it incrementally, and you want to compartmentalize it a little bit, I find. Is you want to keep it under wraps. Okay, I'm going to try this new crop, and I'm going to put it here. And I'm not going to get too carried away with it. And just if you're on a larger farm, okay, this area, you might have a plot that's just for experimentation or something like that. Keep things a little outside, and when you're experimenting, don't bank on it. Do it as something extra, so you're not hoping for the yield that you've been promised. And I'm contradicting myself there in the sense that I did that with Salanova this year. I went full in with it. But I also had 2 expert farmers give me that advice. So in that case, it was good enough for me. I was like, okay, these guys are both in a similar climate, a Canadian climate, both published authors, incredible farmers. Okay, I'm going to just go for it in that case. But in any other case, I'm trying things in very contained, controlled experiments. And it's a very much like the scientific method in that sense. It's okay, I've got this hypothesis on how this is going to work, and I'm going to conduct a series of controlled experiments and then test that hypothesis to see if it works. But you're not just going to do your whole farm or your whole CSA as, hey, I'm just going to grow all this stuff and all these new things and hope that people like it. You got to be conservative with this stuff, because you want to keep your base, your cash flow steady with things you know that people for sure, and then try stuff. And if that experiment works, okay, that was a success. Maybe we can implement that into our baseline production, and then people will adopt that. And I've definitely done that in the past multiple times. I did that with microgreens. Like I was one of the first people I was the first person at our farmers market to grow microgreens on a large scale. Like nobody at our market was selling like big bags of sunflower shoots or pea shoots or things like this. There had been farmers in the past that did them a little bit here and there, but I was the first one to say, hey, I'm going to test this market and see how much the market will bear. So I started with just doing a few flats a week kind of thing, bringing them, and then growing that organically, growing it to what the market is wanting, instead of just forcing this thing on people or just throwing it out there and be like, hey, buy it. And again, going back to what we were talking about earlier about understanding economics, I find is like I'm very much an Austrian economics type person. And the thing that I like about Austrian economics is that in a free market, you have price signals. So there's so much information in a marketplace because there's hundreds or millions of people interacting all independently and making decisions at the same time. There's so much information happening there that the price mechanism and the market mechanism is the best way to figure out how things should be priced, because that is the live biofeedback of the individuals that are interacting in that market. Whereas the Keynesian approach is to say, hey, let's stimulate, let's dump in money, and let's fund this program or whatever, because we're these people up top and we have this great idea and we know better than the market and we know better than what everybody else thinks. So let's just fund this. And it doesn't work because that's not how human beings work. People are individuals. They're independent and they're all working on their own self-interest. So on my farm and in my production, I'm very much applying the principles of Austrian economics in the sense that I'm doing these controlled experiments and looking for price mechanisms and listening for feedback from my marketplace to figure out what works best and what doesn't.
This whole topic of CSAs, it's a hot topic, and it actually ties into a question that somebody sent in. So next week, I'd like to tackle that question because it gets into the idea of the market and the economics of this topic, CSAs, which I think is really relevant to a lot of people. So let's touch on that then.
Yeah, oh, totally, sure.
Thanks for watching this episode of The Urban Farmer. Be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss a single episode.